Why does the paint float? What is so special about this paint? What kind of paint do you use to make it float? That is a great question that I get asked all the time. So here's some answers. I personally mix my own paint. I have a process that I use, and it allows me to custom create many different kinds of colors. But if I was beginning, here's what I would do. I would probably start with the Jacquard beginner marbling kit. It comes with 5 different colors of paint. This allows you to take small samples of each color, mix them together, and build new colors, because the colors they provide are primary colors, so you can do a little mixing. Another option would be to purchase 5 types or colors of fluid acrylic paint, because yes, we are using acrylic paint. That's what's floating on the surface. But it needs to be fluid, it needs to be able to float. There are a few brands that produce fluid paint that would work for the process. One is Jacquard, another one is Golden. And then a lot of art stores do carry no-name brand or non-branded different types of paint. So if I was beginning, I would pick 5 basic colors and just test and try. If you find that your paint isn't floating properly, you can add a little bit of distilled water to it to kind of thin it out more, but be careful because there's no going back to make it thicker unless you're adding more paint back into it. Before you get started with your paint, you want to shake that paint. It's going to mix the pigment and the liquid that is in the fluid paint. That's to redistribute those color molecules. Another really interesting piece of the paint is saturation. So think of a square filled with only 5 circles. Well, those 5 circles can open and expand to fill the space. But if you put in 30 circles, they're only going to be able to expand so far before they run out of room, because everybody else is taking up some space. And that is the concept of the paint saturation. It only has so much space to float in. If you want richer, darker colors and you add more pigment or drops of paint, you're going to achieve those richer, darker colors. Keeping in mind that you can't really change a color and make it significantly darker than its natural ability to be, but you can definitely get a light tone versus a darker tone based on the saturation or volume of paint on the tray. One of the things that I love about water marbling is there's no color theory. When you work with watercolor, if you put a yellow paint beside a blue paint, you're going to get green. But with water marbling, that doesn't happen. Each color is completely separate and doesn't mix. So you don't have to worry about working light to dark or mixing different colors together and getting a new pigment. It just doesn't work like that. Now, even though I've just said there's no color theory, one thing that can happen is when you work your design significantly, you can see color reflection. So imagine you put yellow beside blue and make them really, really thin. They may look green, but the color won't be green. So that does happen sometimes when lines of color are thinned out so they reflect each other. Because I teach many different workshops and I use a large volume of paint, I carry my paint in these large tubes. They're actually ketchup bottles from the dollar store, nothing fancy. But when you buy the Jacquard marbling kit, they're gonna send you these little guys. These are great because they've got that little dropper top. So I actually use these when I'm working with kids because they have to squeeze them. And naturally kids want to just squeeze things. Whereas with these, you have to just tip and drip and allow gravity to pull the droplets. So that's another thing about the paint is you only really want to work with 1 drop of paint at a time. You're not looking to get many droplets quickly, because what happens is if you get too many drops of paint all at one time, they break the surface tension of that gel or size and sink to the bottom. Now, if you're having problems with your paint not floating properly, there's many different reasons why. This art form can be a little bit finicky or tricky because it doesn't like humidity, it doesn't like heat or sun. Paints can also be damaged if they are transported in the cold. So for example, if your paint has been frozen during transport, it won't float properly. So when you are ordering your supplies, if you're in Canada like I am, you have to be really cautious of if you're ordering online or if you're going into the store, because in the winter, sometimes that paint can be frozen and it will just crackle and not open properly. If your paint, when you print, is looking very soft, I would go back to that idea of saturation. Make sure you have enough volume of paint on. And make sure that you are layering colors on top of each other to push and move other paint out of the way. With paint, I like to say that some colors are bossy and some colors are shy. So each color behaves a little bit differently. So when I work with customers at my workshops, I have all my bottles labeled bossy that are really big pushers. So what that means is if you dropped that paint onto the tray and it just whoosh, explodes huge and takes over. That's what I like to call a bossy color. Now, why does that paint do that? It's the dispersant in the paint before it comes to me. So what that paint is made up of pigment and dispersant, and how they make those colors and what is added into them makes some of them open really big and some stay really small. So I've learned that some colors, you can add a lot of them, and some colors, you just really want to tread cautiously. So that's a part of the experimentation with water marbling, is just learning all those quirks. And you'll get to know your paint and you'll kind of learn what does what and how it behaves. There's lots of different ways to apply paint to have more control. And as you watch along, you'll see some of those. So hopefully I've answered all your questions about paint, but if you do have more, pop them in the comments and I would love to connect and hopefully answer them. If you're enjoying learning about water marbling and want to learn more, hit subscribe, and we'll be uploading more videos about all of our process and different ways you can use water marbling to create.